This week we go further into the world of spiritual and psychological emergencies here in Western Australia. Now, not so long ago, I and a few colleagues got together and we did a little research project where we listened to the actual experiences of those who resonated with the idea of a spiritual and psychological emergency, and they shared their experiences and we taught them through a structured interview. In this presentation, I share some of the findings and the patterns that came out through those conversations, and what we find is something really fascinating. What we learn is more about these naturally occurring human development episodes and how they are almost unprepared deep dives into our interior. There's a lot of fun. The presentation lasts for about 40 minutes, and then afterwards there's a good Q&A session that goes for another 20 odd minutes afterwards. There's much to learn about this, which is very overlooked and often swept to one side in our society. So I think there's a lot to learn, and if you resonate with this and you'd like to help, or you'd like to share your story, or you'd like to just talk more, then please, by all means, reach out and get in touch. So enjoy the presentation. How many people here, what's the best way to describe it? Seek alternative healing modalities. I know it's a real wanky phrase, but like...
Give us an example.
I don't know, let's go anywhere from meditation to sound bowls to sound healing to psychedelics to anything of that nature. Chiropractic, yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah. And I suppose the other thing to ask is how many people in the audience actually offer such a service? So Claire? Sound. Cool.
I certainly recommend it.
Yeah.
It's part of my practice. I don't do it personally, but
Yeah.
I'm very inclusive of all of that
Yeah.
for my clients.
Just out of interest, did anybody come here expecting me to give them the answer?
Yeah. I thought I'm an answer. I'm outcomes focused. I just want to leave you with an answer.
Yeah,
If that's okay with you.
You're gonna find this evening
Good. Okay.
42 lots
Yeah.
of fish and dolphins.
No.
No, because it's not.
Yeah, I know that.
It's not quite like that, and there's a couple of things I want to check in on along the way, because that's not what you're going to get this evening, as I'll explain. So, as I said, this was a research project. I had a level of curiosity around this, which I'll explain in a minute, and we set some big objectives. Georgia, sitting here, actually helped out with a bit of a good chunk of the doing the work. So even one of the most basic questions in the research topic was, are these legitimate things? And I will say that the fact that there's 11, 12 people in a room that have actually come here because I said spiritual and psychological emergence demonstrates to me that there is something around this which is worthy and noteworthy of attention and focus. And I think there's quite a bit to it as we'll go into it. So what is it that we're actually talking about? And this was the meme that Michael was talking about. And it's worth just considering this meme. How many people have seen this before? Like, probably loads. Yeah, so what people think a spiritual awakening is like versus what it's actually like. Now, again, the fact that this meme has done the round says to me that people are actually sort of resonating with this topic, and there's something there. It also says to me that, you know, we've got this nice, almost consumer capitalism picture of it, of, you know, sitting there or on the beach holding your crystal with your wavy hair, and all of a sudden, you know, the angel wings will come and I will be enlightened and fly off. And yet, this, right? Where it looks really untidy and it's kind of scary, and yeah. And so I think this really sums up a lot of why I was drawn to this, and why I wanted to know more about it. So so the first part of this is just orientating people and setting setting some pins out so we all know where we sit on this. So there's a difference between an emergence and emergency. So I think it was Stanislav Grof who first in 1989 came up with this idea of a spiritual emergence, and as you see, highlighted is a breakdown of meaning that can lead to transformative growth. He sort of said that it went on to a more expanded way of being that involves enhanced emotional and psychosomatic health, greater freedom of personal choice, and greater connection to others and nature around us. The difference between an emergence and an emergency is that when an emergence becomes so big and so overwhelming and unmanageable and exceeds the individual's capability, that's when he sort of suggested that it becomes an emergency. Right, and that's kind of this sort of picturesque. And I like this, that the individual is unable to gracefully return to day-to-day functioning. Makes me think that I might be in a perpetual emergency because I'm not quite hitting that grace. And look, for me, and it's interesting that we're doing this here in South Frio, right? I used to live in South Frio for about 5 years. I see more people heading towards vipassanas, meditation, sound bowls, sound healing, yoga retreats, vision quests, and now we're seeing, ayahuasca's in the topic of conversation. People are microdosing with mushrooms, but more and more people are drawn to something, drawn to an investigation that takes them inwards. And my personal concern, and that was shared with Georgia, and there was 2 others, Paul and Mel, who helped me out with this, who weren't able to come this evening. We just had this concern that the more people were being pulled towards this stuff, the greater there was a probability of these sort of things happening. And I was getting concerned that people were getting drawn to these modalities thinking this was going to happen, when from my own experience of one at this point in time, I was feeling a lot of this. And so I felt like it would be noteworthy to actually do something around this. So just to give you a brief idea of, look, how I got here, like for those who don't know me. CV, long story, super short. Went to university to try and make sense of the world and did a psychology degree and came out of it and went, what the fuck was that about? All it seemed to cover was nutters and mad people, right? And I was more curious in like, instead of the top and bottom 5 and 10%, I was interested in the middle 80. And we really didn't cover that. So I left university quite fed up with it and went traveling and whatnot. And then came back to psychology and did a master's in business psych, because I thought, well, that's the closest thing to any sort of human psychology I could get my hands on. And where do the middle 80% hang out? Well, they all generally go to work, so I'll go and do that. Ended up starting a career as a consultant, starting off being a trainer, coach, learning expert, and then moving into managing complex systems change. So London Underground, Nottingham City, stuff like that. Fast forward on a few years, got to around about the age of 40, and all the wheels fell off in my life, right? I was the poster boy for a cliche midlife crisis. The whole 9 yards. It was brilliantly spectacular. And at the end of that, I was like, what the fuck happened to me? So I went out there and just tried to make sense of the world by, instead of doing the book learning that I'd done before, I thought I'd go and listen to the stories of other people and try and understand that. So I created this little podcast, WA Real, which has been going for like 3.5, 4 years. And there's a couple of guests who've been on it who are in here right now. And more and more as I was going through this, I started to see patterns. I started to see things reoccurring. The subjectivity was different in the stories, but the underlying patterns started to resonate around something. And then last year I came across this guy, Jules Evans, and he started talking about this thing called spiritual emergence and emergency. And I thought, oh, this is pretty cool. And one of the things you can do when you've got a podcast is, rather than read their article or watch a video about them, is you can just send them an email and say, hey, do you like to come on my podcast? And then you can talk to them and ask all your questions that you want to. Jules, together with a psychiatrist called Tim Reed in England, they pulled together, and this is where I started to get the idea from, they pulled together 12 people for an evening who had incurred a psychological emergency. and they shared their stories one after another, and that was related into a book called Breaking Open. So at the end of chatting to Jules, I sort of said, like this is big, dude, isn't it? He's like, yeah. This was after the podcast had finished. And I said, so I'm going to go and do something similar to what you did in Breaking Open, but I'm going to do it here in Western Australia, and I'm probably going to look at sort of just listening and to people and just seeing what happens. He said, yeah, go right ahead. So that's where I got to. I then sort of started to chat to a few people like Georgia and Paul and Mel from the Human Excellence Project, which is why you've got that little Human Excellence logo up there next to my podcast logo. And the first thing we did was we sat down with an enormously large whiteboard and asked ourselves, if we're going to do something around this, what's the big objective? What is it that we actually would like to do? If like the blue sky thinking around this. And we came up with these three things, which is, the first one's really, really simple and basic, but it's really powerful. It's to legitimize and normalize spiritual psychological emergence with everyday conversation as a recognized growth aspect of life as a human. So when I recognized that 12 of you came here this evening just because I put out an advert that said spiritual psychological emergence, it's a step forwards towards that, because somebody obviously resonated with it. And then in an ideal world, the people of Western Australia and beyond do these better in a more supportive manner that becomes more transformative and an integrated event in their life. So this is like dialing back the emergency and into more emergencies. And that in turn, we of Western Australia and beyond have the confidence and bravery to own our own human journey and role model this to the next generation. So no more is it like, oh, Bryn's having one of his shaky turns, just leave him alone for a while. It's Bryn's going through some like stuff here and he's
stage 4.
He's stage 4, or whatever it is, and he's coming out and that it's supported and held and recognised with others. So lofty goals, but still, sometimes if you're going to go and take a step in the right direction, it's good to stick some stuff down. So what would I like you guys to get out of this evening? And I didn't put this in the invite because I thought it was all just a bit, I thought I'd spring it on you while you're here. So the first thing is not to scare you. And I say that, but the last time we did a presentation and there was a couple of women who really started to freak out. But I wondered if this actually was the cause of a psychological emergence. But we can talk about that afterwards. But like I said, you have to deal with my flippant sense of humour from time to time. But it's about spurring conscious decisions. Like I said, if you are making a step towards taking a healing modality, recognise that these things could happen and this is part of your growth. And hopefully this evening you'll be able to get at least a feel for what's going on. And hopefully I'll provide you a bit of a framework to help you just navigate conversations and for yourself to be slightly more prepared for if this happens to you. And another really, really, really important thing, and the last bit is, and we really dialed into this in the research questions, was learn how you can actually play your part to support others when it occurs. Because that's one thing we're really not doing very well. So before we get into the thick of this, there's just a couple more bits. And there's a really big tip with this stuff, right? Human mind likes to, Bryn's presented A and Bryn's presented B. So therefore A must lead to B, and it's all a logical causal thing. It doesn't really add up in this, right? We like to put causality on things and exert control, so then we can feel comfortable about things that potentially can be scary and fearful. This, I would suggest, is just sit and ask questions by all means, but let's just allow it to be what it is. Because science kind of struggles with it. And when I say science, it's like science methodology at times can really struggle with this, because what we're talking about is really subjective experience that are personally relevant. They have a lot of individual meaning. They're very unique and they're unreproducible. It's like dreams, right? I could have a dream. You could have a similar one, but it would mean different things. And the chances of us having a similar dream are pretty bloody unlikely. So these are very subjective experiences. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to tell you what the high-level findings were from this, and then you've got a choice. You can sit with me for the next 20 minutes and I'll tell you how we got to these findings, or you can go home at this point. So the high-level findings that we got from our qualitative research was that these human transformative growth episodes occur, right? And that we found that they were very much sort of unprepared deep dives into someone's own inner world, and they can be hugely impactful and destabilizing. I think if I was going to add anything else to that sentence, it's that they were unprepared deep dives, and it was almost like someone was held within their interior. During these episodes, changes appear to occur at a very deep and structural level of our subjective being. And the triggers, the things that people identified as some of the trigger things that tip them in, some of them can be actively sought, like I mentioned earlier on, like I actively go to a meditation class, I actively take some mushrooms. But then also there were a number of triggers that occurred that were just passively part of the environment that people interacted with. There's no one universal way through it. There's no do this, this, and this, and then you'll be out the back and you'll be fine. It's very much a personal thing and down to you. It seems that we have very little to no individual or shared understanding infrastructure or tools to help at this point, or at least I haven't come across loads. One of the things I did in between finishing the research and then presenting it was I actually went and sat down. I took a couple of people out for breakfast who sort of clinical psychologists of 30, 40 years and ran this past them and sort of said, particularly this, do we have much infrastructure for this sort of stuff? And he was like, no, we don't. They don't. Yeah. And the treatment is different. And, we had a couple of drug and alcohol counsellors in the last session, and that led to a really interesting and fruitful conversation. There seems to be some underlying patterns, and we need more curiosity and research to do these better. So I'm going to give you a quick framework now to try and help you. It helped us to delineate and almost plot and understand and allow an emerging pattern to come up. So what we did was we considered these 4 quadrants. If anyone knows of Ken Wilber and integral theory, I nicked his quadrants, right? I found it really, really interesting and helpful to when we were taking the key points out of what people had to say, was to be able to plot them in different parts in different quadrants. So what the quadrants are is that there's basically 4 perspectives that arise at any given time, right? And we've got like the individual interior, which is our inner private world. These are the thoughts, emotions, memories. Nobody can get into those unless you let them in. There's then our individual exterior. So this is our body, our biology, our behaviors. It's anything you can see, anything you can measure, right? Then there's our collective interior. So these are our relationships, our shared understanding and our culture. Again, it's all the stuff that lives within us, not like in our heart, but within our subjective experience, but it's our sort of shared part. And then there's the collective exterior. So I put here like systems and the system. So we've got network, technology, internet, stuff like that. Does that make some sort of sense? Right. You super sure about that? Because
there's no test, is there?
Yeah, there is actually. So if I was to ask you where would a community group sit in here, where would you plot it? Yeah, cool. If I was to ask you...
Well, it's not. It's interior.
You what? It's the interior. Because it's, I guess...
It's a bit of both?
It's the relationships of the community group that are giving you a sense of meaning.
So internal relations between people in a collective sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Cool.
Fine.
Where would you put like someone's heart rate and hormone levels? Sorry? Individual, what?
Exterior.
Yeah.
You'll be able to see a heart rate at the,
Yeah,
well,
you
you
can
can't
measure it.
see it. You can measure it.
Where would you put capitalism and the internet?
Yeah.
Although, I don't know, man, it could totally be the interior.
It could, yes.
Capitalism
Look,
is very internal.
Look, you go further into this, you realise every quadrant has an interior and exterior, but we're not going into that. And then finally, where would you stick someone's trauma and identity?
Certainly.
In there.
Yeah.
Now look, I did that not to be like a school teacher, it's just really quite important, as you'll see. Because what we did is we chose a qualitative research method. So we didn't assess people from a biological perspective. We certainly didn't do it from an observer perspective. I didn't turn up and watch somebody in the middle of a spiritual or psychological emergence. And we certainly didn't look at it from the perspective of the DSM-4. Now I put that down the bottom right, but having chatted to a few psychologists, they would have it down here because it seems like it's just like this collective understanding myth thing. But so we very much went down a qualitative, subjective route of asking people about their experience and asked them from here to give their perspective on things that occurred in these as well. Does that make sense? So I put out a video back in, where was it, September, October? Yeah, about October, November, something like that. I put out this video, me in a smart woolly jumper, just asking if anybody would come forwards and
Where did you put it out, Bryn?
Facebook, Instagram. I think I actually spent $100 on Facebook advertising, which shows you how good I am because nobody saw it. So I just might as well just throw $100 away. It was good. It was good to have it play. I know one person who saw it. So yeah. So out of that, 12 people who we'd never met before, completely never met before. Well, actually, I think we had up to about 19 people actually get in touch, but for various reasons, sort of, yeah, the seven didn't quite work. Because we were pretty particular about only picking people in Western Australia to see if there's anything that happens specifically here. And there were a few people from around the world that sort of cottoned onto it. So this was pretty cool that 12 people actually stepped forward and went, yeah, I'm happy to chat to you for what was anywhere between half an hour to an hour and share what was a pretty personal experience. We found that of the 12, 11 we could probably say were spiritual emergencies. The 12th person probably wasn't. He was probably still struggling with addiction cycles. So we sort of looked at it and popped it to one side. Of the 11, the episodes lasted between 6 to 24 weeks. So this is not like a weekend thing. It really seemed to last for a while. And everybody looked back at these episodes as positive and a necessarily deeply personal growth experience. So we asked them a series of questions, right? And they were pretty basic, open-ended. The first one was, tell us about life, what was going on, blah, 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 just to set the scene. And then we said, right, what was the trigger event that went into that? After that, we then asked people, about what was going on, how they were interacting with the world, what was going on inside for them. And then we asked them what really helped, what didn't help, and what would really help if you were going to go through this again. Or if you had a friend over there, what would you do? So we stripped out the key points out. So I think I did 7 of the interviews. You did 2, and Paul and Mel did a couple as well. And then we pulled out the key points, and then we started to plot them. And this is why this framework's really kind of helpful. So as you can see, first off was the triggers. So we've got things like guided meditation, an undeniable inner experience. Got a vision quest in there. Would you say that is up here, or is it down there, or?
I was curious. I was thinking that. I was like, oh, interior. I was like, I mean,
you spend a lot of time with yourself, don't you, on a vision quest?
except that the crux of it isn't actually that it's about yourself. It's about your relationship with everything else.
Yeah.
And exterior events, like things that
Yeah.
happen to you during the time, can be the precursor to. So.
Yeah, as we've found.
It's complicated.
It is, and this is complicated. So this really helps to at least put a first level of delineation, and the idea is to split it out so you can at least get your arms around it. Otherwise, it's just a big mess. So yeah, we've got some other stuff with bodily related, kinesiology, chiropractic, breathwork, serious medical issue that led to a near-death experience. Psychedelics. I put psychedelics up here because I guess for me, they're still, I take a physical compound, put it in my mouth, it does something in my body, and yeah, you're going to go in here, but you've manipulated something out here. Then in the collective, there was counselling sessions where there more and channeling sessions, from other dimensions and what have you. A series of, this was really interesting, a series of arguments with a housemate. That was super fascinating, that. And also, someone else just put forward that it was the paradigm of the expectations of others, just this continual, this is my shared understanding of what the world wants of me and everybody wants of me, and then that sort of caused things. There was another one over in the bottom right corner there, which was failure to find legal answers to an issue. They really thought that a legal system was going to give them the answer, and then it didn't. Interestingly, Jules found in his research that Brexit was a cause. He did his over in the UK. I think the interesting thing about this for me is, like I alluded to in the findings, is that kind of anything from here upwards, these are all things that people have consciously chosen to go and do. Stuff below here are interacting with the outside world. You could say, okay, somebody went and actively sought a counselling or a channeling session, but a series of arguments and others. I know from my own experience, the breakdown of a relationship caused one for me, and the loss of a job. Yeah, and the loss of a sort of career ending, the loss of a job that sort of signalled the end of my career, my business consulting career. That certainly caused another one. So I found that particularly interesting. Now we're sort of going to go into the real guts of this. And this is really content heavy. And if anybody wants me to send them this, I'm more than happy. I'll whack up a PDF. This is where we were getting to the guts of it. This is where I said, what were the thoughts and feelings that you experienced during this event? So we're now really getting into it. So, we've got stuff like, never experienced anything like this. It wasn't what I asked for. I heard that a few times. I know I wanted a transformation, but I didn't want it like this. Confused, depressed, anxious. Big existential questions are coming up, What the fuck is all this about? Who am I? What am I doing here? Really, what is happening? I thought I was going crazy, losing my shit. Am I going to stay like this forever? That really came up quite a bit. How am I going to cope? Am I going to lose everything? Is something wrong with me? This was really interesting from one individual. I actually know what insanity feels like, having come back from the other side. There was people saying they was really struggling to compose themselves. There was this was probably one of the most graphic ones, was there was no island inside of me to cling onto for any refuge in the middle of this. I was just at sea. I couldn't make sense of anything. There was a real sense of dreaminess. I had this as well in one of mine, where for at least 3 to 4 weeks, it was almost as if I'd had a joint at breakfast and everything was just a bit dreamy and I couldn't pin things down. Feelings really began to get switched on, and thoughts had feelings for some people for a first time. They'd think about something and they'd really feel them. There was quite commonly, there was linked with that, there was a real sense of pronounced empathy. Like during this, I could look across the street at some bloke and I could feel their pain and everything that represented in the world. So it's really quite intense. Experience of a lot of synchronicities, and there's a big flick between seeing things at a big macro level and a real micro level. So as you can see, there's a whole lot of stuff going on here. It is really quite confronting, and that's why this quadrant got a whole page to itself. Some of the things that were happening from a bodily point of view, there's some real bodily responses. Those feelings had some real sensations to them. A lot of crying. Some people got into sort of real extreme exercise, or at the other end, just complete fatigue. Body aches and pains. Sleep again. Either some people not sleeping for days and weeks, and then others just slept like they'd never slept before for 2 or 3 weeks. And some panic attacks. Then how did you deal with others in the outside world? I became more thin-skinned to others. I struggled to keep a mask on while interacting with society and people. I couldn't relate to others. I struggled to be around people. Struggled to be around people that wanted to fix me and save me. And that's when we come to what helps and what doesn't help. That's a big theme. Super sensitive of boundaries all of a sudden. Like, whoa, you can go away. And then you could feel everyone around, a real sense of pronounced empathy. Sort of, I've mentioned that before, but you could really feel their pains. This, when I thought about it, this actually really impacted me personally quite a bit, just actually thinking about it, is that there's all of it, for a couple of people, there was a real deep sense of realization that there was a lack of investment in quality connections and relationships in their life. So that when they were all at sea, when there was no island to cling to, when the wheels were coming off at that point, they realized that all their mates were just mates. And who do they turn to? Who's your best friend, so to speak? Who's the person who's actually there, who you can go to? And for some, this experience, whilst processing that, also came with that realization at the same time. And that in and of itself is really quite confronting. And I found really sad. Really, really sad. Yeah. Also interacting with the outside world, more thin-skinned to the outside world, struggled to play the game of the system with banks and money and jobs and admin, and struggled to engage at work. I had several people saying they would just go to work and then go and get in the car at lunchtime and shout and cry or punch the steering wheel. Some had to leave work or study, and some people just started, this came up a few times, everyone started to see everything as energy, which I found really interesting. So that gives us an idea of what's going on, right? And one of the things that jumps out to me is like, a lot of that is very akin to what I showed you at the start, you know, what we think it looks like and what it actually looks like. I think we've done 12 interviews. I'd love to get that to 25, 30. What I'd also like to include, and I'm probably jumping around a bit, but I'm pretty certain that there are spiritual emergencies where people have almost like this touching the numinous experience, and it's not like this. It's more like manic, and it's more God complex, and it's more, oh, I've seen the light, follow me. So I'd like to interview a few of those, but they're sometimes tricky to get a hold of because the ego plays a bit of a role in that, you know, when it starts to come down.
Can I make it a bit warmer? Does anyone?
Certainly.
Yeah, well, not
Although from my old days of doing 3 days of training, I always found that a cold room kept people awake.
Yeah.
But there you go.
Don't make it
So there we go.
I'll just turn
You
it
can
off.
move.
So look, we'll be into the chit chat in a minute. Then we move to what helped, what didn't help, and what would you have liked that would help. So these are some of the things that people came up with, and it's fascinating to hear. Knowing that this could happen before, you know, just knowing that this could happen, and it could be an event, and knowing that it will end, and that it is an episode, and that I will come back. I'll be different, but I'll be the same as well. I'll be able to function again, but I know I'll be different. There's a suggestion of just do what fills your soul and stand up for what you need during this period of time. You know, it's very easy for us to go, oh, am I really ill? Am I not? This, that, and the other. Oh, should I? And you know, many people go do that dance around of, I'm just going to sit here and moan about how ill I am until somebody tells me that I should have a day off. And in this situation, nobody's really going to tell you exactly what to do or to take it seriously. You have to do it for yourself. There's the acceptance of the tough realization that only I can get me through this experience. Nobody else can come in and do it for me. And surrender to the process, trusting something bigger than yourself and bigger than your identity. And understand the importance of doing your work beforehand. This was a big suggestion, that having that level of introspection and curiosity about your interior. And also be real with yourself and upfront about where you are in life. We all like to tell ourselves stories of convenience from time to time, just to gloss over things and make life palatable. And that, I understand why people do that. But with this in mind, it's probably worth being real with yourself from time to time as to where you are actually at. From an individual exterior point of view, the big suggestion about just be in the body. Wailing, shouting, crying, hugs and physical connection, they were a big request. Put your body in nature with fresh air, in the ocean, in amongst trees. At the bottom there, it was fascinating. I interviewed 2 ladies on the same day. Neither of them knew each other. One in the morning, one in the afternoon. Both had decided to take themselves down south and go and live in a yurt for a couple of months because they just needed to be touching ground and nature, which says a lot for being in nature and vision quest, I would say. Good food, stay off the piss, herbal remedies, grounding modalities. It's interesting that some people were suggesting kinesiology and chiropractors, and other people had suggested that they were the triggers that got them there in the first place. So that's interesting. And camping a little bit. So it's very much a be in the body, allow your body to be. And then from a what helped during this time and what didn't, from like that collective interior. Some people wanted to be just left alone. They just wanted to genuinely be by themselves. Others wanted someone to just listen, hold space, validate the experience. This is real, this is happening. An acceptance of what is happening and just allow it to be. They did not want to be fixed, they did not want to be solved, they didn't want to be judged. And there was this big thing of not wanting to feel like being a burden on others. That was a big part of repelling people away and just wanting to just be in nature if they started to sense that. A sense of reassurance that this wouldn't last forever and it would pass, and just hearing that from somebody else, and that there is a wider community outside that understood and supported this. This was very much like what would really help. Also, a greater understanding of this by those who offer the healing modalities. There were a couple of people who rang up the person who had provided the service and went, "Oh, this is happening," and they were like, "Ooh, really?" And there was that not really knowing what to do. So even if there was an understanding of it and an ability to just direct them or just take some level of duty of care in it, and it raises an interesting question, and it it's great, Claire, that you're here and you're interacting with this because you see it as a thing that could be a byproduct of the service that you offer. I think there's an interesting discussion, particularly when you've got help and commerciality and boundaries and scope and that, where the service starts and the service ends, but then understanding the impact of the service that you provide. And yourself as well, who provides sound healing. Sorry, it's not all just Claire. I think also it's being open and honest with your surrounding networks about where you are in life and what's calling you in. If all of a sudden you find that you're being pulled towards, trying out some mushrooms or ayahuasca, and yet you're not going to tell your husband or wife, and then all of a sudden this stuff happens, then you're going to have like several things to deal with all at once. And also that this is normal. I didn't mention to these people what our big goals were, but it was interesting that this should be normalised and widely understood by society. And then what helps from an exterior point of view, grounding in nature, being on the land, just lying there under the big sky, engage with the medical model if things do get too much and too intense, you know. Creating a respite from the system, reducing workload, taking leave, spending time in the bush and rural areas, similar to the top points. What would be really great is if there was a greater understanding of this by GPs in the psychology and psychiatry world at large. And there's also, and this is a real tough one, you know, it's also putting I put admin stuff in place. Ensuring that you have enough like sick or annual leave, or you have enough provision for that in case something happens. You know, we're talking about a psychological, spiritual emergency, and people can say, yeah, but you know, I haven't got the time or the money to put in place. But then, you know, similarly, you could fall off a bike and break your leg, and that could happen. So it's having that level of prudence around your life and recognizing that this could happen, and if you are being pulled into something, that this could be happening, and so therefore what simple provisions can you make in your life if this was to occur. So they were the major things. I think there's just a few other individual reflections and comments that came out. You know, I was given something that ultimately I could handle and sorely needed to happen, even if it didn't feel like it at the time. There was a real sense that, you know, after the event, you look back and go, yeah, well, actually I could handle it, even though I didn't feel like it, but it was all like extending boundaries. Being prepared to let go of everything, most precious relationships, knowing that they will come back. This was interesting as well. You know I asked the question about triggers, but often at the end of it, it was, in hindsight, it'd been building and I'd been leading myself. And so the trigger was just the last event of many that seemed to be the tipping point. But, and when it happened, it happened so fast, but when they look back, it's often like, oh, this was so obvious that this was, you know, to quote a great phrase, this was in the post, it was coming. See a higher order logic of it. There's a real sense that of cracking open and delayering for some, particularly around feelings, where people have been really good at suppressing feelings for good chunks of their lives. All of a sudden it's like, whoa, this feeling tappers, come on. And that probably linked with that pronounced sense of empathy. And then it's learning how to deal with that in your body and is part of your everyday life. Often there is significant shifts or pronouncements in people's priorities, values, sense-making framework, and just how they're instructed inside. So things that were important a couple of months before were now no longer, and stuff that was never important before all of a sudden has just switched on in their life. And some people left past behaviours and networks of people behind. So yeah, so that's kind of that's what we did find. Oh, that was another thing. These often are not one-offs. At least 2 people indicated that since their primary event, they'd had others. And that the second ones were easier because they had the opportunity to draw on the capabilities that they'd developed and the reflections through it. So I'll take you through the high-level findings. I could ask that in a minute, but so what's kind of arising for you guys listening to that? There's a whole lot of stuff, stacks of stuff on a slide deck. But like I said, we didn't want to do this exercise by just reading a few books and hypothetically taking a book learning position on this. We wanted to actually go out and listen to people and build up a little bit of a body of knowledge from the bottom upwards. Does anybody resonate with any of the stuff that's going on there?
I just think I went through something, very much like this, and I think I mentioned to you last time we met, like at the time, there was nobody that I could talk to or that understood or that had any sort of, didn't even know what that was, and it was really scary because there was nobody. So, it's great that it's being normalised and being talked about, and people are actually connecting and talking about it and making it a normal thing.
Mm.
Because, you know, when you're deep in yoga practice or meditation or some kind of spiritual practice, and then something is triggered off and you can't facilitate that or offer any sort of guidance, it's and I think personally I believe that it's becoming more and more, it's happening more and more.
Mm.
Because the world's just changing.
Well, I think
Consciousness is changing.
it was interesting that I had at least, I think it was three or four people who, they were almost in tears when they finished talking to me, because they were like, Bryn, I've never really properly been able to talk about this. I've never had the space to actually properly talk about it, because even if I start, then people, it triggers them and they want to come in and say, oh, surely it wasn't as bad as that, or, you know, or it wasn't quite like that. Maybe it was this or something like that, because they just don't quite have the framework to get their arms around it.
And it's unknown.
Yeah, it's so scary.
People go, whoa, don't want to touch that. This must be, a psychiatric thing.
That's right, yeah.
And it just gets bundled off into that mental health world. Sorry.
Yeah, no.
In there. And you see this so much. I mean, I work in the health environment. You know, that's what I do. I'm on this, this interface with people, and it's so easy for them just to get flipped across into, oh, you've got mental health problems. Oh, she's nuts. Or,
Yeah.
you know, and
It's around the CBT and antidepressants.
They're probably less nuts than any of the rest of the world, but they've actually sort of been through this, or can I be so forward as to say we've been through this, because I think if we're sitting in this room, we've all probably, if not been through this, had someone close to us that might have. So it's very, very interesting, and we kind of intellectualized it as well. We really did lift it up to we took it out of the touchy-feely, wooey sort of space, because we wanted it to be taken seriously. Now, have we done a robust, study? No, we haven't. This is a feeler study. So, we would love to make, as Bryn was saying, make it more, make it better, find out more, and then build from there.
We were pretty rigorous with it. Like I said, I sat down with two notable clinical psychologists and told them exactly what we were doing, and they said, well, it checks out.
Yeah.
And I got a lot of freedom outside of a university to do it. Normally people do this in the university.
How would that go if you hadn't, I guess, what I found is people will only meet you as deep as what they've gone. And would you be able to ask these questions if you hadn't had experienced
That's a good question.
an awakening?
Maybe not.
It's a good question. So I've got this emerging hypothesis about this, right, is that, and this is emerging, that as there's a balance between the complexity that we see in the outside world and our ability to meet that complexity with the complexity we can see within our inner world, and how we, rationalise and make sense, or however we make sense of it, right? And so as we see more deeply into ourselves, we see more deeply into the world, and this and that. And I think ideally you'd sort of want it to be a bit like that, but often the world can go off. I mean, fucking hell, look at the last 12, 18 months. That's pretty traumatic and complex and uncertain and ambiguous. And I think that was another reason why I was drawn to want to do something about this, because the world just seems to be getting more uncertain and ambiguous. And so that the world's taking off, and the balance to be able to meet it from the inside in terms of your understanding of complexity and meaning making can be stripped out, and that can be quite traumatic. And so something sort of ruptures in the middle of that. So that's a long way of me sort of saying I think you probably would need to have experienced this to actually even probably hold the space, maybe, or something of this ilk. If you went down Bryn's emerging hypothesis, I think it'd be pretty tricky Check it out to
I
the
think-
audience. I think it'd be pretty tricky to hold space for something like this if you hadn't.
Because I work as a volunteer on one of these crisis lines, right? But in my spare time, and what's really interesting is that you need to have some understanding of in that role. I mean, we're not talking the spiritual stuff that very rarely comes up when we get calls. It's people that are triggered in trauma and they've got to talk to someone, or worse. So to be able to take those calls and to understand the context of what those people are calling about, you need to have some legs on life experience yourself. And you see the difference between those that are studying sort of psychology or counselling straight out of uni, or they've got to get their hours up for their practice, and their ability to deal with those calls and the complexities and the depth of it and what that means to a person is very, very different in 20-year-old eyes to a 40-year-old eyes to a 60-year-old eyes and beyond. Like you do gain some wisdom by the time you get to sort of this point, and I think you do need to have some of that to be able to take the important bits out of what people are saying and be able to reflect that back in a meaningful way and understand it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you touched on the near-death experience and, part of my experience, and I found that just in recent times in assessments of how I've dealt with this, and psychology being a study of the mind by the mind and a very abstract way of looking in on someone's experience through only the eyes of the study of what's accumulatively brought forward, not experienced.
Yeah.
And I had a well-practiced psychiatrist assess what had happened to me, and he ended up in tears. And I see a lot of things coming forward now, people having the question and exploring these realms of what's happening to me, in the essence that I also see a lot of people learning to teach yoga, learning to these modalities purely and acutely using that as a means of trying to understand what they're going through in the realms of helping others. And in seeing this prominent figure in psychology go to water, and me sitting there trying to describe a kaleidoscope to a blind man in the essence of a near-death experience, it was quite isolating to be in that zone, and in particular when you are going through something where you feel that you are isolated and no one else is going through it, it's hard to understand who to reach out to at that point. And generally, the only people that will understand you are people that have gone through the same or similar experiences to meet you on that level, to reflect the experience that you've had. And a lot of the times I can see just in what I went through, me just starting to talk about it triggers people on so many different realms, that it's quite isolating in just that form where you're sitting here, someone talking about their first world problems of something so insignificant, and that person just trying to scrape through with immense pain, and psychological damage, due to one incident. It's such an expansive thing. I think the more and more people that start to awaken to these things that are happening, and there's still days that I can sit and listen to a didgeridoo play, and I'm on another existential trajectory where things are, I can look back at the dots that I've gone through and realise the times that I was having these, emergencies or emergence that I got through. I didn't know how I got through, but I can reflect on how I got through them and then find that air of gratitude for the strength that I have today. But yeah.
I think for this, like you said, for the strength you have today, I've kind of noticed in a strange kind of way, I actively do things now to bring these sort of things on now, and I like dropping in to the abyss and then seeing what comes back out. But that's been over a couple of years, and you know, I still frighten myself from times, not a lot actually. But I get more sort of grounded and comfortable in the fact that I could drop into the abyss, but something I will come back up, or if I don't, you know. But I will come back up, and so that means that you can face a lot of life's challenges, whether it be, you know, complex and ambiguous and ever changing world, and go, well, crikey, this is moving really quick, and it might sweep part of my identity with it. You know, because I know that I'm Bryn who does this for a job, but that might just get swept away really quite quickly. But I know that this still is here until it leaves this flesh bag. So yeah, if that makes any sense.
Add something?
Yeah, for sure.
What would you like?
We're into the open discursive part of the.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. I can see the depth of, probably just the surface of the tip of the iceberg, but I can't imagine what you've been through. It's huge. I think that really highlights why peer support is so important, and this whole thing of, like, you can't support other people without having an understanding of it. Well, you can, but I don't think it's going to be as effective. And I guess, you know, one of my main, you know, when Bryn started talking about this project, I was thinking, wow, wouldn't it be just amazing to be able to provide support to people, whether it is, maybe it is a crisis phone line for people going through spiritual emergencies. How cool would that be to have, you know, like somewhere to turn where you can get supported through this, or, you know, like, you know, my partner's going through this, or you know, someone at work or whatever, you know, like, I don't really know what to do, but I don't think they're right. Is it mental health? Well, maybe it could be, you know, but is it,
It's
is
a
the,
bit both, isn't it?
yeah,
I reckon that would be dangerous if it was put in the bucket of
yeah.
mental health and
I just put the government in charge of it.
Yeah.
But
Exactly. But this is kind of the motivation of, like, we just want to help people,
Yeah.
because we.
I mean, look,
this
this is 12 interviews,
yeah.
and it's very much version 1.0. It's 12 more than many people else have done. Like I said, I'd love to get to 25, 30. At that point, I would like to be able to sort of just really take some of this and sum it up and put it into a few simple little freebie videos that I could put on a YouTube channel that basically goes, look, you know, like, I've recorded this evening, so look, here's where we started, but then it's like, you know, at a real sort of rough, here's some bullet points. This is what you need to know. And if you're in the middle of it, these are some of the points, things to consider. And also, you know, if your partner, if your friend, if your, you know, your husband or your wife is going through it, here's some things to consider as well. Because, you know, if you do this, the chances are you might push them away. So you might just need to do this. And also to reassure them, because like you said, Chad, you know, you start opening up and you suddenly find out where everyone's trigger is, because they're like trying to correct the narrative or push you away or talk over the top of it. And so just that probably bit of guidance for the person who's around them, just to say, look, you'll get your boyfriend back. They're going to be slightly different, but you'll get them back. They'll be okay. It might take a few months, right? You've got to let them go and it will come back. You know, and we get to that whole thing around nervous system, you know, it's different, you get triggered and you want to hold on, you want to fix, you want to do the thing. You know, we've all probably been in relationships where we've had that, where, yeah, I won't go on. But
See, this is I feel it's very noble cause, grassroots, you know, because as you said, we've come here, we've seen the thing on our social distraction, the social media, and like you're coming forward and you're having this vision and the question, because ultimately it's a question. with real no answer yet, on it, and just simply being able to present your videos and like I know even just for me talking about in any form, there's no one that I found you can actually turn to that has you can confide in such a way that isn't going to label, in some construct of how things used to be. And I think it's just such an expansive world we live in now, and it's changing exponentially. Even just from COVID, like so many people are noticing how much was not important to them anymore, and things they thought were important are no longer important, and life's a lot more simple for a lot of people that I know, and just that alone creates some emergencies. Who am I beyond not being able to walk on the beach because I'm now stuck in this house for a week because of there's so many things that are starting to wake up, and I really feel that it's the little threads, it's the tiny little threads that you start to sew into this tapestry that give people an out to find. And it's good to have this going forwards.
I think another angle on the research, if you want to expand it, is not just increasing the numbers of the individual participants, but looking at it from the collective perspective. Because I think when I'm trying to make sense of this, and not just how to help people or prepare people, but looking at it from the angle of why is this a tricky thing to hold, and like you mentioned, it's when it's a service that someone's offering, when does that end and stop, which is one side of the coin. But the angle that's helped me is to look at, well, how did other cultures used to handle this? And we're so individual focused with this is what the individual could
century of the self.
Yeah, when really, even just looking at it, the classic rite of passage, which of course is what this is meant to
probably
take care
of. Instill, bring about
bring about, or people would you don't force someone to do it. Well, different cultures do it differently, but many rites of passage people nominate to do it, it's only when they feel ready, but it wasn't then an individual thing. So even using the Vision Quest for example, people will go out and it's a very individual thing, but the whole thing was you'd come back and the community who'd be holding the space to begin with, hold it while you're out there, and then they come back and they recognise you as changed. They would then recognise, okay, you've received this vision and we're going to support you in and rites of passage are similar, it's all about the community helps you integrate it. So of course we miss that piece now, not just in the context of an individual service of a rite of passage, but collectively at all times.
Yes.
When, and it was recognised, people not being able to find people to talk to. One thing that made me start to prepare people better for this experience recently was being conscious of, start talking to others about it, but nominate who are the people who you're going to say, look, I just need 2 or 3 of you to be there when I come back. Because I don't, and it's not me trying to palm off responsibility and I'm always available to help, but it's so important that it's actually the person's actual community that are the ones holding it. So how can we...
It's a nice continuation of care through that, isn't it?
It's not, it's just how being a human is naturally meant to be. And with the Human Excellence Project, the thing I love about it so much is the idea of mentors, and we don't have that because people haven't gone through initiations and rites of passage themselves, but it's because when we even service providers, we do these things separately, but what if we could start being more conscious about forming communities around it so that we could then actually be able to hold people in a much more natural and human way, because there's only so much individuals can do for themselves, and the cause of it, why is this a problem now, I think is much more of a cultural problem rather than for that one person individually.
I have to agree. From my own perspective, this is only a personal perspective. I think we've completely become disconnected from the wisdom of the elders in our communities. you know, when did we turn to an old person and say, what do you think? You know, like we've just lost the ability of that as Western culture. You know, we've tidy away the oldies into homes and tuck them away so we don't talk to them. Whereas that's actually probably our biggest knowledge base that we should be tapping into and integrating through. And then I feel that it's very much my responsibility to make sure that my kids, who are teenagers, teenagers now, you know, that they're going to be prepared for when this stuff happens, because I want them going into the world knowing that they are actually going to be, you know, caught if this stuff happens. But yeah, it's quite an alien concept, and it's certainly not one that I would talk of openly outside of this room, really, because it would be quite confronting, I think, for a lot
Bryn,
of people.
Did you draw any? Sorry, this is a question that's been burning in my brain for a while. I'm stimulated by the actual invitation that brought me here. Do you offer any clarity on the delineation between a psychotic break and a spiritual event?
Not really. So we made a couple of conscious decisions right at the start of this, which was to put it out, see who came forwards, ask them questions, see what happens.
Right.
One of the the 11 from which we drew the data set from, they were very, we didn't hone it, but they were really quite clean. As in, you could see a lead up, there was a trigger, there was an episode, and they came out. And then they had a sense of reflection across all of it. They had a sense of, quite deeper sense of learning and improved sense making as a result of it. The 12th person couldn't give us any of that.
But clarity, okay, so but you're describing dynamics of something for which you're calling a spiritual experience.
I'm tagging the name to it. Yeah.
So, I mean...
I've, and this was part of why I checked in with Bill. Because...
Who's Bill?
Bill Saunders, who's he was one of the two psychologists I checked in. I checked in with him quite a lot. He's not the biggest fan of the DSM-4 or the world of psychiatry, right?
Yeah.
And he sort of said, you know, if someone was to present with this, it would be seen as a lasting thing, and so then they would be stuck on medication for an extended period of time.
Yeah, but that's treatment. I'm still trying to... Those are how it would be treated within the psychological framework. But
did I go and grab something and see if this would compare to the DSM-4? No.
But let's put aside the DSM-4. I'm just saying, how can, as a person in the street, so you're a person you're a guy in the trenches with an active interest in this because of your own experiences and your history and your past and all of that kind of thing. So what I'm saying is, how do you draw the line between a psychological event and a spiritual event?
Can I add something?
It's a good question.
To that, like my own experience that I had. There was no question whatsoever that it was a spiritual experience in my mind. Like I just knew it through every part of me.
So what?
And also it went through common stages, which I later learned do form like a common thread when people go through these experiences. There's a trigger, then there's a build-up, and then there's a crisis, and then shortly after the crisis has passed, there's usually a dark night of the soul, which is a depression, and the whole period takes about 12 months to unfold. And that's very much what happened with me.
Yeah.
It was a pattern.
I guess, back to your point.
Thank you.
I called this a spiritual / psychological emergency because I couldn't quite... I think
Does it need to be labelled?
I don't know. It's difficult.
Like, does it?
Look, I'll really blunt with you. The reason why I put the two together,
Wouldn't matter if it
because
was one or the other.
the reason why I put the two together was one will appeal to your irrational mythic, and the other one will appeal to your rational methodical mind.
Right.
If I say psychological, it's got like science orientation or something.
Yeah.
If I say spiritual, it's got that more mythic. And one of the things I'm sort of learning at the moment is, different people get orientated at different times towards different stuff. So
Yeah.
I don't know the answer.
So it could be a false dichotomy, is what you're saying, suggesting.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
like
I mean,
this.
what's-
I mean,
Yeah.
isn't this what you were talking about at the beginning? Is what we want to do is we want to control it, we want to name it, we want to have something
Yeah.
because that makes it so much easier. Because if I can name it,
Then I can get my. Then I get.
there's
then
a
I'm getting-
treatment, there's
Well,
a that.
that's
So we
science
want to
stuff.
say it's one or the other, which is the treatment.
Yeah,
That's
but
good,
no,
that.
not the treatment, because that medicalises it as well. Whereas it's,
No, but I'm saying even this,
yeah.
people like to name it. What
Yeah.
is it?
Yes.
I want to name it.
Yes.
If it's
absolutely.
if it's
It's
this,
very
not
comfortable
this.
to
Comes with
knowing-
understanding.
Yeah, if it's this,
Am I
not this.
matter?
and
Am I
Blah,
this?
blah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
But
So,
I think if I was going through something like that, I would ask myself that question, am I going nuts?
Oh,
Am
yeah.
I-
Oh yeah.
And because
sure.
I know Charlotte's story, one of my questions to her was, did you ever think that you were going mad? And she said no, like she knew 100% it was spiritual.
Right. But there were, as you saw from some of the quotes I took out, there were a lot of people who weren't so sure.
Yeah.
Because they have no words to
But I
describe.
think if I was going through something like that,
Mm.
that would be a question I was asking.
Oh, believe me, I asked myself that question. I was like,
Did you look at
what
if they
is
follow
just
a
happening?
faith or what their exposure to everything spiritual beforehand was?
No, I didn't actually.
Okay.
So that'd be
interesting.
an interesting question. One of the questions that emerged from the last presentation, which was really interesting, so we're back to that whole urge and want to control, was one of the ladies sort of said, well, there were two ladies who asked two different questions, but they're sort of similar. One said, so if I stop doing my meditation and yoga practice, will that mean that this won't happen to me?
Yeah.
And then the other one was, so, and if I do a lot of that care stuff that you were talking about, will that just make it a whole lot easier?
Yeah.
And I was like, no.
Yeah, you got to get.
Well,
through
I
that
can't tell you. I
stuff.
can't.
Might not.
Might not.
It's fascinating.
It's fascinating.
Listening to the stories, I wish I could have listened to more, but the scheduling of it was really hard. But their stories were extraordinary. Like these individuals, and every person that goes through anything like this is got a story, and it's going to be wild and wonderful and scary and tragic and all of those things that make us human beings.
I would be thinking this is like more common than they're not common. I would think that these
Oh, yeah.
stories, I mean, people not wanting to come forward, I understand that, but I would understand that this is probably more huge,
Possibly, yeah.
But those-
I think this is the norm. I look at it, I think,
But you were talking
Yeah,
about
that's
the
gone through
article,
that.
this
Jesus,
specific,
shit.
there's
every
milestones
day
along
for
the
me.
way.
But I'm just saying, everybody, I mean, like, the thing is that
Common
we
experiences with common people.
we call it stress burner, we label it, we want to do it, oh, it's just part of this, or,
Possibly that-
no, so,
Yeah.
but I'd be surprised that,
You know, when labels
and then
things
there's
like
obviously deeper levels because of
spiritual
trauma
arousals.
and
Yeah.
bringing it, that brings it to this higher level, so it's just basically Mount Vesuvius.
Right,
down.
we've got two conversations going at the
Anyway,
same time.
Sorry.
And now both are
Now
finished.
we've got none.
Now we've got none.
Way to kill it.
Anyway,
Aced
it's
it.
good, brilliant,
Aced it.
really, oh yeah, it's
So
been
look-
so interesting, so, yeah.
Oh yeah,
Well done,
thanks.
Great presentation.
So yeah, some take-home suggestions. Choose consciously. Start talking to others about it. Face the often ignored space of your inner world, because that
It'll come
seems.
back to bite you at some point in time.
Yeah, it'll turn into one of
Yeah.
those episodes.
Take time to talk openly about where you are and where you're being drawn from within, with those around you. Take some time for some courage to legitimise your inner world and your actions and being. And be actively aware of how to deal with your triggers, because you could end up being a carer for somebody or be encountering this, and like Chad was saying, you start talking about this, it can trigger people off. It's like, just go and talk to your nearest and dearest about your own death and see what happens. See how long they want to stay in the conversation for. Not very long, so often. So thank you so much for coming this evening.
Thank you.
It's
Thank you.
been it's just awesome that people want to come and talk about this and actually take the first step towards legitimising it and what have you. If anybody wants to help going forwards, that'd be awesome. If anybody wants a copy of this, if anyone wants another chat at another time, that'd be great. If anyone's got a group that they think, do you want to come here and present this, or like a watered down version of this, happy to do that as well, because where you think there might be a need for it, I'm happy to come and chat. So thank you very much.